I'm Justin Wells. I'm slight amendment. I'm the Chief Program Officer for Envision, and I've been with the organization for a long time. And
I'm Jillian Juman, and I've been with the organization for 2.5 years, but we'll get into the whole story of what brought me here to Envision.
Yeah, that's part of what's going to be fun about the conversation we want to invite you into. Just a little bit about kind of how we're framing this discussion about assessment in assessment system building. Envision Education started in first opened its doors in 2003. I was lucky to be a brand new teacher. One of the 5 teachers that had 100 ninth graders. Bob Lenz, who many of you know, was the principal. He was co-founder of Envision, and I was lucky to be landing in that dynamic. And we were starting up around many of the time of some of the other networks that are associated with the deeper learning movement, including High Tech High and New Tech and Big Picture, et cetera. And along the way, so we run a small network of schools in the San Francisco Bay Area, Oakland, San Francisco, and Hayward. We opened schools, for the first 5 years or so. We have 3 high schools, 2 middle schools. And in addition, we started working with others. Very much proud of this as a charter network. We started consulting with public school districts around the things that we were feeling confident in and wanted to share the learning about. And a lot of that has to do with assessment system building, which is why we want to talk about this work today. Performance assessment system building in particular was how we were kind of framing our approach. We became known for our work around portfolio defense, which is a practice of students standing up, presenting/defending their learning. Many other networks in the deeper learning family have similar kinds of practices. We're really proud of our system. Lots of people were able to come and see our students do their defenses, and that was some of the beginning of what we were consulting about. Related to those ideas were student-led conferences, internships that ended with a culminating presentation, and of course just good old-fashioned project-based learning that culminates in powerful exhibitions of student learning. Thanks to some help from Linda Darling-Hammond and some great academics at Stanford who were in our neighborhood, they came in and helped us understand that we were building, they called a performance assessment system. We have to have our jargon in our field, right, to describe things. But it was helpful framework to describe what we were up to. And so we developed a theory of action about really like our whole design of our schools. We described as an assessment system as our primary organizing principle. And it was 3 steps. You have a statement about broad scale learner outcomes. Many of us know these now as graduate profile, portrait of a graduate, school-wide learning outcomes. The deeper learning movement has had its 6 learning competencies. These are all the genre of what we speak. So you establish that. Part 2 is then you design a set of performance assessments that really give you evidence that the students have met growth and or mastery/proficiency in those outcomes. Very much a understanding by design framework here for those who kind of recognize the logic. That's where we came up with portfolio defense and other systems where we were trying to hold ourselves accountable to following through on our portrait of a graduate. Part 3 is then designing the pedagogies, the day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month instruction and learning experiences that allow students to succeed on those performance assessment challenges that you've designed. So if we want a 12th grader to knock our socks off with a portfolio defense, what kinds of learning experiences need to be happening for the past 4 to 7 years that make that happen? So, good old-fashioned backwards mapping, but hopefully really concretized and a shared vision of excellence, because people can see the synthesizing moments that I think performance assessment challenges can function as when they're done well. So that was our theory of action that we were running with for 20 years. And 10 of which were also consulting to other school districts, sharing that framework and wherever they were in their journey, helping them with that kind of theory. Along the way, we also developed some principles around high quality performance assessment. What is a high quality performance assessment? We're proud of those principles. I'm happy to share a few slides and things with folks that RSVP'd for this, so we'll share those as well. So that's that's kind of like leading up to the pandemic. So there's just a quick history of how, and we were all like, what is Envision about? We're about our performance assessment system. And that's even what we consult about. What we vulnerably want to kind of now open up is in what has happened in the pandemic and afterward, where we're to exercise that deeper learning skill of critical thinking. How are we not totally right about what we've been up to? And how do we need to be thinking about assessment system building? Similarly, you know, what do we need to keep doing? But what do we need to maybe stop doing or start doing, to use that old framework? And that's where Jillian and I have been in some great discussions, and we want to kind of do some of that with you here now. And then actually, when Matteo gives us the cue, we actually just want everyone in the room here to be part of that discussion with us.
Yeah. So I think I came in with like 2.5 years ago, and my history is I was a dancer. That was my first career, and then I went into education because I couldn't afford that lifestyle, right? So that's a whole talk on another day. But the conversation really was around, in New York City, I was an international baccalaureate principal. And so the conversation is always, how are you thinking about assessments without deciding whether you're on the left or right? Meaning, I'm only doing performance assessments and ignoring testing, and ignoring that there's different forms to assess, knowing that projects can also be not so good, just as much as testing can be not so good for kids. So I was always having those conversations. Go into Los Angeles in my career, same conversations we're having, where we have systems that are making choices. Either we're going to do testing, or we're going to do performance assessments. And when we get to Envision, the conversation is, how do we not get into a situation where we cannot have conversations with different leaders across the nation because we're asking people to choose? And we're in a situation where kids are reading 3 grade levels below where they were before, particularly when we're talking about urban and rural. And we know that if we have a strong, high-quality performance assessment system, that's when kids and adults come alive. We know that. We know when kids are able to talk about risk-taking and curiosity and really get deep into the work that they do, that's actually when they're talking about the deep parts that will actually sustain them for long periods of time. We also know that really smart folks aren't the ones that hold the most important jobs, right? Dare I say many other things that are going on in our political climate. But I'm going to also say, right, that we know that there's all these other parts that kids need to have, adults need to have in order to really thrive, including intuition, right? All those pieces that make us connect. So how do we do that without making us choose or talk to districts? Particularly, I was coming out of an urban setting where kids were really struggling and our current students were really struggling. So the conversation I came in with Justin actually on our first flight, which we're going to get into many flights. So we had conversations via flights. And it was usually an uncomfortable Southwest flight.
The first one that Jillian was, I have the notes here. It was SFO to Denver about a year ago. And to the annoyance of all the other passengers around us, we got to sit next to each other, and we were kind of getting into it about Jillian asking me some great questions about some of what I just described to you, about how we think about our performance assessment system. Also acknowledging what were some of our challenges, post-pandemic challenges that we were dealing with. And we started realizing that we were grappling with the question, is, in quotes, performance assessment system, is it sufficient to the challenges of the moment? Or in what ways is it, in what ways is it not? And there was just some really great back and forth that I think, Jillian, if you recall, I think it was helpful for you to kind of learn more about like how Envision got to its moment in time. But I was also, as someone who grew up with the organization from day one, getting asked some great questions by my CEO, thinking about like, are we in love with, I love this framework, are we in love with our solution, or are we keeping in tune with what is the current challenge? And I just really appreciated that push, because I do try to embrace that spirit of critical thinking and always asking, how might we be wrong, and how are we trying to be less wrong over time? Is kind of how I humbly think about the critical thinking moment.
Yeah, and I think we were very good at trying to pitch it. Like, we've been trying to pitch it for decades. So we could explain, and I feel like our team could explain all the reasons why performance assessments were great, but we couldn't really talk about all the ways in which we were really applying the times. Like, how are we treating and talking about families and kids and the needs that are right now? And so that's where we had to do some digging. And I think ultimately got very annoying on the plane.
What are the challenges that I think some of you can relate? We're getting data from our state standardized tests that were remarkably unimpressive, if not like the house is on fire.
Yep.
Okay, full stop, right? Under 20% of our students were able to, answer these math questions that are thrown at them on the SBAC tests. And we started poking into that and learning some more about where they were in their literacy and numeracy levels. And as Jillian noted, just many, many grade levels behind. And before, we kind of knew that they were behind, but we didn't necessarily always do the extra diligent work of like, how far are we talking? And so, just post-pandemic, we started kind of, I think, more honestly wrestling with that kind of work. Mm-hmm. Teacher retention and teacher quality is another big factor that we've been grappling with as an urban district in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then we kept looking at our theory of action that it's just so beautiful to talk about. You have your graduate profile, get your portfolio defense together. Continued to maintain that through the pandemic proudly. Our kids were defending their learning by Zoom, and we're never straying from the power of that. It's a kind of a hallmark for us. But we were, honestly having that conversation about like, what else do we need to attend to that theory of action is not giving us an answer for how to get at?
Yeah, how deep can you go if you don't really understand what you're reading, right? How kind of analytical can you get about your own culture and your perspective if you're not actually being able to grapple with the things that are going to give you the push that you need? And doing more and more projects or more experiments or whatever we're doing isn't tackling that. So then what do we do so that we're not kind of keep giving the same solution over and over again? Mm-hmm. So some of the conversations we started getting to, is this getting to plane 2? I get lost in the planes.
Well, what happened not long after that fruitful conversation, Jillian, is that you did a bunch of whiteboarding in your office. And you called me in there a couple weeks, later. You simmered
My
on
shoes were off. I was drawing all over the walls. That was what was happening.
And Jillian asks me, and I'm going to, have her tell more about what was being. She's like, Justin, what if we think about a new phrase as perhaps an umbrella over how we've been thinking before? Performance assessment system. Let's think about a comprehensive assessment system. Is the kind of the way that you were summarizing what was on that whiteboard. Mm-hmm. I think, say some more about how that emerged and what you were thinking there.
Ultimately, it was a little bit of a step back to say, and all of these practices, many of you guys probably do and know, it's kind of just merging it together. What does it mean to do student work analysis so that we're not waiting for a particular unit to do that? But what would it look like for teachers to be giving deep feedback every single day, right? Because that's really how kids are growing. How are they getting the feedback? How are adults getting feedback? How are they looking at the student work that's happening on a daily basis? How are they doing that student work analysis as we're moving into a weekly kind of look at what's happening? How are we getting the right things in front of our actual leaders so that they're not just going in and seeing practice, but they're looking at what's right in front of them so that we're talking about kid work all the way through? How are we thinking about assessments when we're talking about interims, and how does student-led conferences work through that? I think our teachers were getting really lost with what is the state required and are we against that? And we're in the Bay, so we have lots of opinions, right? Like, that's part of who we are. But are we against that? Is it race related? Or is it not equitable to talk about testing? And the real truth is it's not equitable to have kids not be able to take a test and pass it. That's actually just not okay. It shouldn't be the foundation of everything that they do. They shouldn't be walking around and feeling tested all the time. But really, should they be able to sit down and take a test? Absolutely. And so really this righteous kind of belief around what's wrong and right isn't really the focus. The focus is like, how does assessments weave in together so that we're telling a story about what students need to do to move forward? And some of our kids will thrive in one piece and not another, and then we can dive into that. It tells a much fuller story. And I think what we were doing was, accidentally, not kind of programmatically talking about one part of the system and hoping that most people can make a connection on how all of it needs to connect. And the real truth, having led many leaders, and many of you in this room have led many leaders, it takes a lot of thought process to put a full system together, right? How are we going to do the projects and the student-led conference? Like even putting that calendar together is a pain in the butt. And so we're expecting leaders to do that during a very different kind of leading. We're expecting teachers to think about how all of it fits, and really how to think about how college backwards, kids need to be good at all kinds of things. And so how do we weave that into a system without kind of going in and just talking about a piece that doesn't really solve the larger issue for most kids? So anyways, that was on my whiteboard in many different colors. I had trees, I had pictures, and the only person in the office who really could understand it was Justin. Because we have a similar, I don't know, what would you call that? Something brain.
Well, this leads us to our next flight, Oakland to Burbank.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, probably a few months ago.
Oh, that's the one my husband was on.
You guys are going to join us for Flight 3, which is coming soon.
Yeah.
And
we're sitting next to my husband, Shahid, who wants to die.
Yeah, he was so annoyed with us.
So annoyed.
But Jillian, if I recall, you were a little, tentative. You're like, oh, Justin's been here a long time. He's been like, you guys, many of you know me. I've been on the road. I've been like championing the performance assessment system concept for a long time. It's become my life's work. It's so clear to me that if you have the right set of performance assessment, deeply, beautifully designed, complex performance assessment challenges, and everybody, students and teachers alike, understand what is the awesome scientific inquiry project and writing portfolio and historical research project that exemplifies that discipline and it's going to take many months, if not years, to produce. To me, it was like all the sub-skills, including literacy and numeracy and all that stuff, that's just built in. And so, Jillian, when you kind of said, hey, Justin, what do you think? We've been talking performance assessment, but I think we might be being misunderstood, and maybe we need to think about this comprehensive notion. And I looked at Jillian's work, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that makes total sense. And I think there was even a bit of like, you thought there might be a little bit more like, wait,
yeah.
What have we been up to for 20 years? Mm-hmm. So that led to this next plane conversation where we started wondering, like, wait, when we talk about like whole child commitments and the whole human set of competencies that come, are we perhaps being misunderstood by the field in terms of what we're emphasizing? And then many of you, I think, know over the last decade, there's been so much attention, which has been great, to the social emotional well-being dimension of all this, and a lot of science to show the relationship between the kids have to be all right, so to speak, quotes, for deep learning to occur. All of that is true, but Jillian and I were wondering, when people come see our defenses, when they hear us talking about student-led conferences and stuff, is this sort of like, hey, let's bracket academics for a moment and let's show some of the social emotional kind of well-being kind of moves that we're making that we think are, an important parallel track. But note that parallel, right? Like there's still this over here, eat your spinach over here. Let's do some stuff to kind of attend to student well-being and engagement and passion over here, and we'll, get at it. And then Jillian heard, you heard me being like, no. The reason I've always believed in portfolio defense and performance assessments and stuff is that it represents the fusion of the intellectual and the emotional peak moments. That's what I loved about as a young teacher witnessing portfolio defenses was that when we ask adults, like, what were some of the, peak emotional experiences that you recall? I don't want to hear about Friday night lights and prom. What I loved when you talk to Envision alums, they will talk to you about exhibition nights and portfolio defense moments. They'll barely remember throwing the cap at graduation compared to that feeling of hearing that you just passed your portfolio defense that happens typically 2 to 3 weeks before graduation. And because I'm an English teacher, I care about the quality of student writing. That's always been my goal. I loved portfolio defense because I was hearing students work extra hard on their writing to get it ready for those kinds of moments. I've always felt like if you're going to have kids defend their learning, you better give them learning experiences that are worth defending. So it was a push to kind of, but Jillian, you're right. I got it. But as we looked at where our, this brand new crop of teachers, some of them had never even taught, other than during the pandemic, we were realizing that a lot of people weren't seeing the connection. And some people were seeing our work as attending to student emotional well-being and not as a path toward beautiful work, to use the incredible phrase my friend Ron just did incredible work yesterday on, right? So that's where, Jillian, I thought that was a good push around like, is our work getting misunderstood? And we were talking about that on that flight.
I think we also started to misunderstand it. I mean, we applied for SEL grants over the pandemic. That's where you're getting some money, right? And it certainly is an affect of this work. You do care deeply about students and kind of where they're going. But the intention got lost. And so we saw a lot of work where we love our kids, and then you look at the work and you're like, oh my God, that's not love. That's not love.
Yeah, the work is not good.
The work's not good. And I remember looking at some projects you and I both did, and I had to leave the room, which is what I normally do when I'm upset. I just walk out. But it was, oh, thank you. But it was hard to kind of see that. And we were misinterpreting that. The graduate profile was being misinterpreted around what that means. And what we're really trying to do is kind of define what it means to be successful and all the different ways that it looks and feels. And then we are designing a system, an assessment system, so that we can actually weave over time to get kids where they need to go. And that we are now kind of backtracking and saying, what do we need to teach adults around their own learning, their own critical thinking, their own kind of unpacking and understanding? And we've spent, some time really kind of socio-emotionally helping teachers through that pandemic, which was important. But the other part is they need to be critical thinkers themselves in order to move kids towards this next level. And so in what ways are we not, and we had this conversation this morning, where we are not pushing adults hard enough, right? And we're kind of seeing when adults, kids, anybody, when we feel liberated to kind of express ourselves and be given a pathway to be kind of pushed to our best selves, that's when all people kind of thrive. And so we also put our foot off the pedal a little bit in hopes of helping kids or adults socio-emotionally, but not really understanding or didn't really think through that you actually have to do both at the same time. So our adults are replicating what we are doing. And so that was a nice moment for us to pause and say, oh, we need to actually relook at our competencies and how we're talking about it and how we're actually kind of raising our own expectations of all of us, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that brings us to the third flight, and the one that we want to invite you guys on as our fellow passengers. I'm going to call this flight San Diego to I'm not sure where yet. So we'll update you on what are the moves that we have made. We now do a sort of a diagnostic, kind of pretty, adaptive, IXL, Lexia kind of diagnostic with every student that walks in the door in the first 2 weeks of school, because we want to have the hard data about if there are gaps, like what are they and how big is that gap. We have been instituting, student work analysis meetings as a practice weekly, and bringing in some quarterly interims, some of which are performance tasky, some of which are kind of traditional multiple choicey. We've, of course, continued to do portfolio defense and student-led conferences and stuff, but what we acknowledge is that we're adding some layers to the assessment system. And because we believe that, ethically, this is how we meet some of the challenges of the moment. What we'd like to kind of now, that's the San Diego to where, and is that there is important work to do with students and teachers to understand how all these parts fit together. And because there is sensitivity, understandable about, like, are we over-assessing our students? Like, it's easy to keep adding layers, almost like tax code, to something, and it just gets Byzantine, and then ultimately fails. But we talked about this Russian doll metaphor of, how do we have our teachers and students understand that assessment is for learning, it's not of learning. We were a big part of the assessment for learning movement, which I'm proud of, and I want all of us to understand that assessment is you're learning in the moment, and we're not pressing pause constantly. Here's an assessment moment. Okay, back to instruction. Here's an assessment moment. If that's how it works, then yes, we should ask, are we over-assessing our students? But if we see assessment as part of the whole thing itself, then I think we could possibly get at people understanding the, daily checks of understanding, weekly student analysis, monthly performance task, check-ins, quarterly interims, twice annual student-led conferences, annual standardized test, biannual portfolio defense. So notice we're thinking about time, and there's a lot of different things to layer in, but it all sounds beautiful, but if we don't implement it, it's gonna fail. So we just want to open up to the work of, like, how do we help all the important stakeholders, namely students and teachers, understand this concept of assessment for learning, so that everybody digs in, instead of, like, having the immune system reject the new stuff that we're trying, and then we're back to square one.
Mm-hmm. So I want to open it up for any thoughts and questions, and then we can kind of talk a little bit about the Envision way as we go along.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, so at this point, we're going to move into the Q&A segment. So we have around 25 minutes. If you guys want to ask any questions to them, I'll just go around and bring the microphone. So if you guys have any questions. All right.
Hi. Thank you for sharing that and that journey. I guess one of my questions is, in terms of the connection, the coherence you're trying to build, in what ways are you helping teachers, or what does it look like when teachers are connecting that information to instructional practices? Mm-hmm. Like, what does that look like? Where does it happen where teachers are actually using that information to shift their instruction?
Great question. Do you want to take it, or me?
Yeah, I'll start, and then we are. We're making some moves around the practice around weekly planning meetings, weekly data meetings. We call them student work analysis, intellectual prep. And we're trying to follow through on that full ideal cycle of you're sort of seeing some things that students aren't yet getting, and that informs ideally next week's instruction, and that there's a revisit of what that skill was, and we actually gather the data on whether the reteach or the reattempt succeeded. And we're trying to kind of not just be like check for understanding mode, but see if we can gather some, hard data from the student work itself, about how that's going. So we're trying to kind of do that on more of the sort of like the weekly to even a monthly basis. We're working hard on pacing of how our teachers move through the week so that they have time for what we call either intervention or flex, so that there's a part of the week, let's call it a 5-day week. There's like a day out of the 5 where you're holding for some of the adaptive moves that need to be made. from wherever the data may be coming, whether it's coming from some of the diagnostic literacy and numeracy tools, or from even some of the performance task, student work analysis. What we're finding is that we have to do a lot of skill building with our teachers for them to be able to deliver that idealized week. And some of it has to do with just like, that's where you get into things like the culture of the classroom management, things like that. Teachers will sometimes move so overly slow. And then what do they let go of? The most important parts, right? The intervention moments, the adaptive moments, the flex time moments. So we're trying to gear summer PD and some other things like that around how do you move at the pace that your lesson plan design mode idealized, so that you have a fighting chance for all the good data that is coming in to be used and responded to, not on like an annualized basis, but literally like on a daily or weekly basis. So it is sharpening our notion of what do teachers need to get better at, and it often has to do with the art of instruction. Surprise, surprise, right? Newsflash. Anything to?
No, I just think I think we had to have a moment of, we have some really seasoned teachers who've been with Envision forever, and then we had some folks where we had to say, you're going to have to break up with the COVID job that you had.
Right.
And I think that we're seeing that across the country. You came in, I remember the first year I got to Envision, it was right after the pandemic. It felt like teachers were in the classroom still through the screen. Do you know what I'm talking about? I was like, you're not moving at all. You're still in the same spot.
They might as well have been back in virtual land.
Yeah.
I mean, the number of classrooms that we would, and these are Envision teachers that we love.
And new,
But the teacher's sitting at a desk in a corner, and everybody's in Google Classroom land, as if they were still on Zoom. And when we raised that as a problem, we had some, newish teachers going like, what's the problem? Right. This is how it was rolling.
And they're right. Yeah, that's how it was rolling. Yeah. So I think we also need to get a little bit honest with ourselves around, we can't just keep saying the words. We actually need to have conversations, including sometimes I go in and I'm like, just let's talk about confidence in the classroom. Like we're getting down to like nitty gritty.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate you bringing us on your flights with you. That was awesome. There's building off that great question previously around, I think that some of our students and teachers feel like assessment is something that happens to them. And then as you get further and further from the classroom, it's harder to make sense of what that data actually means without the faces and the kids that you're sitting with.
That's right.
So we've got this Venn diagram at work that we sort of laugh at, but then also cry at, is in that there's like students, parents, teachers, and the board of trustees. And the problem with our Venn diagram is none of those circles touch. Around the question is, what is the assessment and data that's important to you? So can you talk a little bit about how you built in your organization data and assessments that all of these groups find important and work towards?
I can talk a little bit about 40X. I think we're still working on families, transparently, what they need. And we're also noticing between our 3 different cities that we serve, that after the pandemic, we're still trying to get in tune about kind of what they want to know versus not want to know. I think it's been a different climate. So I'm just going to say that in a transparent way. We instituted 4 disciplines of execution. You're familiar, around just kind of like what data does each layer need to know without getting to the nitty gritty. Because it is true. When I'm sitting in a meeting, I don't know Johnny, Pam, and Tim. But what I do know is the frequency of data being reteached, right, in the classroom, and then what frequency or what percentage they're actually kind of getting that reteach. Like that's the data that I'm interested in. I'm also interested in the growth data. I'm interested in if we did this standard, for example, at 60%, but now kids are at 80%, that's what I want to know. And then if we get down to our school 40X, they're looking at how many times are we getting in and actually giving teachers feedback. Right? And we're really moving into the feedback piece because you can go into a classroom and move nothing. but like, what's the conversation that's happening? So we're really instituting these layers, and it's transparent. Teachers know about the data. They're having conversations. Guidance counselors see it. Parents, when they come in, we're still trying to figure out the communication there, right? But they're coming in, they're able to see the display and how things are moving along. And the school system can kind of work together in that particular way. But we just looked at a data chart and realized it was too low for us when we were in a meeting to be able to understand how to help the system. So then we need to look at something different. So we're in that conversation. Everybody holds what we call these 40X meetings every single week. So then we're crunching that data all the way through. And it's usually through the student work analysis that we're looking at. We're looking at observation data. We're looking at attendance, so that's leading and lagging data, right? The lagging, so we're also looking at the attendance data, because that's something that's been very scary, right? The level of work kids are taking on out of school in urban settings and rural settings, I would say. But for urban, for us, it's competing against school. We can see that when we have student-led conferences or kids are doing their internships, other things skyrocket. So that's important data for us to look at. So that's how we're starting to measure, but I wouldn't say that we got it down packed. We're still figuring it out. Would you add, or?
Just that the student-led conferences and the portfolio defense, which have been a through line through thick and thin, have continued to be an important place where students see themselves in the assessment story. And that's why we're going to, whatever challenges we have about fitting all the things in, we're never going to let go of that part, because it is a tried and true way for students. The way our portfolio defenses work is students craft a general thesis statement about their own growth. So they've got a lot of agency about, like, I'm going to make a claim, and I'm an English teacher. I love it when kids have to defend claims with evidence. But they're going to make a claim about how they've grown over, X amount of time. And then they're challenged to curate evidence of their work, and it needs to come from both in and out of school. So we have some parameters they need to meet. And they're assessed not on hitting some, everybody has to meet the same, performance mark. They're assessed on the coherence of their argument that they've made about themselves. If I feel like I've grown as a critical thinker and a collaborator, and here's the evidence to back that up, we're assessing how persuasive their argument was, which takes pressure off of, we have to somehow come up with some sort of normative threshold as a collaborator or critical thinker. Instead, we can have it be about something an English teacher knows exactly what to do. How well has someone followed through on their thesis statement? So that's, and student-led conference is a mini version of that. There are other moments too where reflecting at the end of a project, a 6-week project, you can have also just mini practice sessions around that. So that's an important part to keep students. What I want to do though is have students start to own and care about, and this is going to be hard because it can be scary to know, well, I'm 4 grade levels behind in reading. And I can't say we've got that totally figured out about how to deal with that. What's the paradox?
I heard somebody whisper it. I don't know.
That cool expression about like looking at the being honest about the hard data, but still it's called.
I don't know what it's called. But yeah.
Anyway, there's a cool expression about bringing our students into learning how to handle hard data, but also with critical hope and optimism. I do think we have got a fighting chance to get that place, thanks to things like the sort of human-centered assessment practices, but it's still not going to be easy. And again, I think in our opening days of in the early 2000s, we weren't dealing with some of the same degrees of sort of scary data around student performance, around literacy and numeracy. So there was a little less pressure there, quite frankly. And we've got to figure out how to use our sort of whole child tools to deal with that stuff. But to Jillian's point, the family part, I'm not satisfied with where we are there. So that's, I think, our assessment of the nice aspects of your question that you got at.
So following up on a family question, kind of taking it from the other side of performance, where we have students who do excel and like the system and the old system and the grades that come with that and the hierarchy and those kinds of things. While we in our division believe in a balanced assessment system, if you will, which is kind of what that
You're
sounded
right.
like
Balanced
to me.
or yeah, totally.
How, when you're reporting and you're talking that, you're still trying to figure out how to report that to parents, but how do you blend, and I'm sure there's not an easy answer to this, but how do you blend a system that is rigid and old school, if you will, with, and the need to report on that, with this type of assessment system without overburdening folks with data, too much data. They want a certain kind of data. So.
I would say, and I'm actually going to go first because I want you to check me if I'm wrong. I would say that we were kind of playing for a long time to the old school. I'm going to say old school way. So we reported on our grades, which parents look online and they see what's happening, right? They looked at test scores and the information that was there. And then I would say oftentimes would pay attention to kind of tests and those kinds of things that were coming out, mostly because I do think we have some work to do around educating different ways of what this can look like. And then there was portfolios, and then kids would do the defenses and families would come for that and student-led conferences. So I think we created a little bifurcated way of looking at it. So they kind of came for this and then looked up this, and then this got you into college, and this was really nice to see, right? So I think some of our work that we need to do is like, what data systems do we need to merge so that it tells much more of a comprehensive story? So you're not logging into 5 different things or seeing something as we mentioned earlier, the soft learning, which is just not true. It's not accurate and it's not precise enough, versus kind of the hard learning, which some of our families, many Black and brown, right? And speaking for myself, we learned that there was a particular way we need to look at a system in order to graduate and succeed. And not deeply understand that actually understanding our culture or using things in our mother tongue or kind of lifting that up is actually what's going to keep me in a job in the future, not what I can do over here. So that's the work when you asked a little bit around like parents. When we're talking about a comprehensive or more balanced system, we haven't been able to tell that story in a way that makes a lot of sense. Check me. Where
No, that was, I have nothing to check you on. Just to, this is actually a great example of if you hear me talk about portfolio defense, one can start to imagine, oh wow, there must be some like really non-traditional ways that they're reporting to parents and this, that, and the other. And sadly, the answer is no. And we actually, have to do very traditional GPA, calculations and all that stuff. In our case, the pressure has come less from parents as it has come from the state and the state university system here in California. So we're bound to the A through G, requirements to get most of our kids who go to a 4-year. For us, we want them all to have that choice, land in the California State University system, the CSU system. And it's a pretty particular cocktail that has got to be met with, a tablespoon of this and 2 teaspoons of that and stuff, long list to get, to be able to qualify to even submit the application. And you got to have the grades attached to science and English, the traditional mode. So we've always had to run in that, much as I, in my more progressive, innovative, would love to see maybe we could even have a report card whose organizing principle is our grad profile competencies as opposed to the traditional disciplines. And I can dream about that. I've even doctored it up on slides of what, where it could go, and we've never done it. What I've always thought was then nicely flexible, though, about portfolio defense is that it did allow a powerful moment for kids to do a deep work using a different organizing principle than subjects. They were using our graduate profile as the shelving for what they were curating evidence about. My collaboration skills, my project management skills, my critical consciousness skills, et cetera. So, but again, I just want to note, I don't love it. It's like, it was like this parallel track. It's like we're running that system over here. We make space through advisory and other places for kids to have time to think about their growth with a different organizing principle than the traditional report card mode. But given, and again, it was so in many ways, I don't think we've ever had to challenge parents, with something deeply alternative, because we were just still playing the game that the UC and CSU system needed to have us play. Now, I will say, I do think performance task design, and I'm thinking about sort of the medium-grained, like, when you get a B in chemistry, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. That's a great space to be doing, I think, some deep, excellent work with high-quality performance assessment principles. Because right now the answer is often, it's a black box, and it can even be like, even within one given school, it means entirely different things from this chemistry teacher to that chemistry teacher, which I don't love and is not fair to kids. So that's been a place where we have been playing for a long time, is using teacher collaboration and sort of departmental or even interdepartmental when you're doing a cross-disciplinary project, which we love to do and try to find opportunities for, is, well, a B in science means that they've designed a scientific inquiry project and done that and met the proficient standard. And so it's not a black box. We have been, Envision has been at this long enough that there's a couple projects, and I'm hopeful that we can even do one here post-pandemic, where we would like to pilot with a willing higher education partner a way for our portfolio. Kids are assembling portfolios, and we do want that to maybe be like not this thing that no college ever ends up looking at, and they just do it because their high school asks them to, and it's a graduation requirement. But that folks in an admission department will look at that portfolio. Yeah, that's right. And if they're going to spend, I know they've got 15 minutes to read whatever. But right now they're reading a personal statement that talks about someone's grandma. And they could be reading, in that same amount of time, some reflections about, like, I chose this piece and this piece and this piece, and here's why. And they're going to get even more bang for their buck about who is the student as a learner, as opposed to who is the student as a person who knows how to play the game of personal statement writing. And plenty of admissions officers agree because we've been actively, so that's, I think, an exciting frontier that we're working on, is how can we get this balanced or comprehensive assessment system to feed with more integrity into what colleges need to know. And I think we're knocking on the door of some possibilities there. But how do you spend those 15 minutes of quickly looking at it? There are better ways. There are better ways.
Making the inequity visible, right? These test scores and assessments that have revealed a really dire problem, right? Students reading 3 and 4 grade levels behind and numeracy issues, et cetera. And I hear that a response to that is to refine practices and particularly focus on what's happening in the classroom. And so I guess my question is, in addition to the refinement of practices and focus on more effective instruction, which can be a lengthy process and a challenging process and a complex process, what are the immediate, or what might be the immediate implications for reallocation or redistribution of resources? So beyond the teacher work and efficacy. How do we have to move the resources we have to different places? How do we have to create new spaces that don't exist yet but need to exist? For example, reading intervention spaces that are small group and 1 to 5. What is that looking like for you?
Yeah, great, Sarah. Love that. Do you have any initial?
I think there's a couple things I will just say that we've had to switch very quickly in the last 2 years. One of them was around intervention. We were kind of doing what I call the spot check, right? Teachers were using whatever data they had and kind of their intuition and just kind of pulling kids, and then doing kind of tutoring, which we know only works for a small group of kiddos. So investing in those systems and those kinds of places is one, which you just mentioned. And I think the other piece is that we've had to spend quite a bit of money on development, and just kind of reteaching the practice of teaching, which I think we were surprised we had to do. Surprised, not surprised? I think we get surprised every time, where we have to kind of step back and say, actually, we need to pull back the hood and just talk about, like, what does it mean to have presence in classroom? What does it mean to actually look over and see what you are seeing and give the student feedback? So we had to pull back there. And then we also had leaders that didn't know how to coach that. So we put some money into putting coaches into school sites. We did have them at the district site. But what would it be if we actually like packed the house with more coaching so that we built a culture around feedback? So we spent quite a bit of money there. And our leaders, we've done a lot of like travel with them, a lot of development with them, things that in the past perhaps we didn't need to do, but we had to kind of start from scratch there. So I think intervention, professional development, you say that, and the coaches are the three areas where we spent money.
And I'll add also just we moved resources toward purchasing curriculum in the last few years, which for an old school envisioner like me was hard, right? Like when we started, it was you find some dynamic teachers that are like just this is all they want to do. Put them in a room, have them like dream, get these big, awesome multidisciplinary projects going, fire everybody up, make sure that I loved it. That was like the first 10 years. I ended up being kind of a lead teacher in that mode. And I would have been horrified if someone said, I got to go do a Springboard. And now I'm the chief program officer, kind of chief academic officer, and I'm paying for Springboard. So I definitely am like, whoa,
I think we had to break up from the idea that not everybody can write. And actually, some people should not be, to be truthful. And most of the folks who make up our support office were folks you were in the arts, I was in the arts, right? We were creators. And so it was like a year of us breaking up with the idea that some people should not be writing curriculum. And actually, most of our folks should not be.
That's a hard, but we're not the only ones to arrive at that somewhat disappointing conclusion. I've had a lifetime of weaving in and out with the great team at PBL Works. I was on their board for a while. I was an early prototyper of some of the design of PBL 101, their famous workshop, which is all about teaching teachers how to design a great project, which I still think is an important skill. But when I was on the board of PBL Works, they realized that like the number of great projects getting implemented from the PBL 101 workshops is not great. And now they're putting more resources into designing great projects for teachers to implement, and we're actually helping a little bit with some of the assessment work behind the scenes on some of that. So that's another version, EL, developing its great English language arts curriculum. So I've watched the various networks associated with deeper learning arrive to some similar conclusions about where's the crux of the challenge and how do we. Now, what I do feel like, that I really would excited to work on, and I haven't yet gotten to, is how do you, if you do need a baseline curriculum, illustrative math, you fill in the blank, or how can you bring in some of there's a lot of expertise in the Envision team over many years about performance assessment design or what makes for a great one. And how can we bring in some of our own seasoning, so to speak, and take a baseline curriculum that we know that we need to kind of just have some sense of consistent grade level instruction. We have a fighting chance, theoretically, of that happening day to day. But very strategically and not overwhelmingly figure out how to, Unit 3, that could lend itself to an amazing student exhibition of work, but needs some more creative ways to kind of like do that well. And so that's a thing that I think we're knocking on the door of, and how do you even do that in a way that's valid and reliable and consistent? But I think it's a promising area for development and if we figured out, I would love to share that learning with other learning communities, because I think a lot of people are facing similar places. Like,
I would say the last resource, just because I want to spit this out there, because I do think this is the time to get a little bit wild, is we did buy 60 units of teacher housing in downtown Oakland. I do think, particularly with urban areas, our Black and brown teachers who we do need, with all, I'm not going to go down the student loan pathway right now, but there's just a lot of barriers to getting the best and the brightest where we need them to go. And so I'm just saying that in an urge to, we got to think outside the box, and that's one of them.
Thanks for bringing that one up.
And then now I think it's the point where we move on to closing remarks. So at this point, I'm going to give each of you guys 2.5 minutes. You guys can say your closing remarks, and then we'll wrap up. So yeah, take it away.
We're on a flight. We're on our next flight. And it was Jillian and I coming here to kind of just share with you where we're at and how we kind of got to this moment, and even thinking about how to frame this has been really helpful for myself as a leader. And would have been great to even get some more of your thoughts and questions, but even from the sampling that we got, I feel like we're onto the right question. This is the right flight. I'm not sure yet where it lands, but I do continue to see that assessment and how we think about it and how we systematize it and how we make people see that we're not pressing pause and dipsticking, that it's actually like getting feedback on the quality of what you're doing is learning, and having people understand that, particularly our students, that I remain committed to, even if I don't totally know what's the current right cocktail.
I think that I have very strong opinions, so I know where I want us to go. But I think where we're really kind of moving at Envision, there's a book called Error. I think it's Error of Margins, Margins of Error. Have you guys read that book? It's an ugly cover, but anyways, it's a great book. But basically, it's about being in love with just being wrong. And so I think we are moving as an organization into kind of a culture of, are we right? And where are there pockets where we can be exploring a little bit deeper, a little bit kind of more expansive? Where are the areas where we can go and prove ourselves wrong in some places, so that we can keep kind of challenging ourselves as we're moving forward as an organization? Because it's really easy. In every system I've been in, we always think we're right. Right? It's every single system I've been in, right? And actually we kind of get jobs about being kind of this is the thing we're going to do. But really kind of getting good at what are the things that we just don't understand that we're going to explore and sit into that process a little bit, so that we kind of keep having these slight conversations that are about where are we actually sitting and where can we poke in and where can we bring expertise, so that we can move, I think, in more alignment with what our kids really need. So I think that's my final thought, and very grateful that you came and kind of hung out with us. So thank you.
Please continue the conversation with us, both informally, a little more conference time, as well as formally. We have Envision Learning Partners is our crew that thought partners with public school districts and charter networks to think about assessment system building. And I'm hopeful that you heard from us today that we're thinking really actively about how to do that well, and keeping up with the challenges of the moment. So reach out to us if you'd like to continue talking about that stuff. Have a great rest of conference. I'm looking forward to closing and stuff with everybody here shortly. And thanks for coming to our session.
Thank you guys so much.